Arriving to arrange a grave for her dying husband, she gave food to a beggar. And following her advice, she placed a camera in the hospital room and was stunned by what she saw in the recording. Katrin was crying again, sitting in the basement. She had started the washing machine and let her tears flow. John was fading away. Her John, her beloved husband, could hardly get out of bed anymore. Cancer was viciously devouring the still young man. He had just turned 45. They had met at work. Katrin had come to apply for a teaching position at an elementary school, and John had already been working as a swimming coach for several years. 6 months later, they were married. There was no happier couple. The only shadow over the Blairs' happiness was the absence of children. Both wanted at least 2 kids, but time passed, and the dream remained a dream. Then Katrin found out she could never become a mother. She cried, unable to calm down and focus on anything else. John supported his wife as best as he could, although he was also terribly upset. But then they tried to let go of the pain that tormented them both and continue living without children. John, darling, I have no right to keep you with me. You can find someone who can give you a child, maybe even more than one. Katie, do you not love me? Her husband said bitterly. How can you say that? I love you more than life itself. Then why this conversation? I don't need anyone else, even if she could give me 10 children, do you understand? He took her hand. Johnny, I'm so sorry that I can't have children, she cried. Beloved, believe me, no one can replace you. This is our path, and we will walk it together. After all, we can think about adoption. Really? Katrin looked up at him with tearful eyes. I was afraid to start this conversation. I thought you would never agree. Don't cry, baby, I love you more than anything. John pulled her close and began to stroke her hair. Unfortunately, they never got around to adoption. And now John was dying. The doctor said there was no point in staying in the hospital. Now all he needed was the care and attention of loved ones so that he could spend his last few months in love and peace. Why is fate so cruel to me? Katrin thought. I wasn't meant to be a mother. And now they're taking my beloved man from me, ruthlessly and cruelly. Despair filled her entire being. She could hardly bear to look at the almost skeletal John. She tried to be strong, not to show how much it hurt to see death literally holding him by the hand. Katrin forced a smile and tried to talk about trivial things, to cheer John up, to give him moments of joy, but it came out poorly, somehow insincerely. Now, Katrin was sitting on the floor in the basement, crying over her entire life, her failed motherhood, her happy but short married life. But she couldn't sit for long. She had to pull herself together and go to John. He might need her help. Katrin stood up and went to the bathroom to compose herself. Her husband must not see tears on her face. Katie, John said quietly when she entered the bedroom. What is it, Johnny? Katrin approached the bed and sat next to him. Have you looked into the grave? He suddenly asked. What? What grave? You know. You remember I want to be buried next to my parents? I remember. Katrin swallowed a lump in her throat. And? Have you checked? No, John, please. Don't bury yourself alive. Katie, baby, it's better to think about it in advance. It will be easier for you later. John pinched the bridge of his nose. His darkened face and greasy hair made him look like a zombie from a horror movie. His nose had become sharp, his cheeks hollow, and there were dark circles under his eyes. Only his eyes remained almost the same, deep and filled with kindness and tenderness for the whole world. John had always been like that, ever since he was a child. He strove to help everyone in need. It didn't matter if it was a pigeon with a broken wing or the neighbor's girl scolded by her aunt for not doing her homework. John always found a dozen kind words for everyone and tried his best to help. John, Katrin could no longer hold back her tears. I can't live without you. I don't want to live without you. My girl, don't cry. Please don't. Maybe I did something wrong in this life. Or perhaps this is just my allotted time on earth. You can live without me. You are strong and very beautiful. He took her hand in his thin, dry hand. So they sat until John fell asleep. Suddenly, Kat felt as if her husband wasn't breathing. She placed 2 fingers on his neck. It was always easier for her to find his pulse in that area. She felt faint pulses. John was alive, just sleeping. Catherine got up from the bed and quietly left the room. How much time does he have left, she thought, sitting at the kitchen table and fidgeting with a towel lying next to the salt shaker. She was very afraid she would miss the moment he passed. But she needed to work and had to leave her husband alone for several hours. With her heart pounding, Kat would return home and approach her husband's bed with even more trepidation. "I'm still alive," he would joke and smile. Her heart would clench so tightly she thought it might crush her. She didn't always find the strength to smile back. It was early morning. Kat had a day off. She resisted for a long time, but finally decided to go to the cemetery. This would give her husband peace of mind. She couldn't break a promise to a dying man. Kat turned right. The cemetery greeted her with silence and tranquility. If it weren't for the graves, tightly pressed together, one could enjoy this peaceful atmosphere. Kat parked and got out of the car. She glanced at the door where people usually resolved issues with the caretaker or some other person. Kat knew little about these matters. An older, yet lively and spry, man emerged from a side building. "What can I help you with?" he asked gently. "I wanted to inquire about a plot. My husband's parents are buried here. His last wish is to be next to them after he dies. His days are numbered." It was his request. Kat pressed a handkerchief to her eyes. "I understand. But you can only discuss this today after 12 or tomorrow from 10 to 2. Mr. Black handles these matters." "Damn," Kat crumpled the tear-soaked handkerchief. "All right, I understand, thank you." Catherine trudged back to the car and suddenly saw her. A girl about 10 or 11 was sitting right on the grass, chewing on some pastry. She didn't look like a homeless child. Her hair was neatly braided, a hairpin holding back unruly strands on the side. Her faded old dress wasn't dirty or wrinkled. She was clearly from a very poor family, very poor. "Hi," the girl suddenly greeted Kat. "Hi," Kat responded, taken aback. "Come to visit relatives?" "No. Not yet." "What do you mean not yet?" the girl wondered. "My husband, he's very sick." Kat sniffed. "He asked me to find out something." "My mom also died recently," the girl said sadly, taking another bite of her pastry. "Pneumonia. Does your husband have pneumonia too?" "No, dear, he has cancer." "Would you like an apple?" Kat reached into her bag and pulled out a yellow apple with a red blush. "Yes, please," the girl exclaimed joyfully, jumping to her feet. "Are you hungry?" Kat asked. The girl first looked down, then raised her big gray eyes to the woman and nodded. "It's a pity I don't have anything else with me. There's a little shop nearby. They sell the most delicious pastries, just finger-licking good," the girl said almost cheerfully. "Really? Will you show me the way?" "Of course. It's very close. Just a bit further than my house." They got into the car and drove off. "You live near the cemetery?" Kat shivered involuntarily. "Yes, see those brown houses? My aunt and my sisters live there." "Why do you come to the cemetery, dear? By the way, what's your name?" "Molly. And I come to the cemetery because it's quiet and no one bothers me to think." "And what do you think about, Molly?" "Mostly about my mom. Also about how I really don't want to live in an orphanage." "What orphanage?" Kat was startled. "For orphans. I heard Aunt Gina talking about an orphanage with a neighbor. It's hard for her to manage her 2 daughters and me alone. Uncle Tom went missing 2 years ago." "How terrible." Poor thing. Maybe you misunderstood your aunt? No, I understood her perfectly. I don't blame her, but it's just, Molly started rubbing her eyes with her thin fingers, just that I don't want to live with strangers. We're here. That's the shop. The girl pointed to a rickety building with a pink sign, the faded lettering reading, Magic Bakery. They hardly spoke on the way back. Can I get out here? Molly pointed to the curb. This is the house where I live for now. See the flower boxes? On the 3rd floor? I see them. That's where I live. Thanks for the pastries and everything. Good luck, Molly, good luck, dear. Catherine drove on. On the way home, she thought about John. How was he now? What if he needed something? But Kat couldn't leave her job, especially at the end of the school year. But the thought that something might happen to her husband at any moment didn't give her peace. Maybe she should install a camera in his bedroom? Yes. It's not that difficult nowadays. She could check and listen to what was happening in the room through an app. A little spy gadget. On the same day, the miracle gadget was in Catherine's hands. Following the instructions, she attached the camera to the chandelier. Completely inconspicuous. Kat didn't want to tell her husband about it. But now she would feel a little more at ease. A few days passed. During each break, Kat would open the app whenever possible and try to understand what was going on with John. Usually, he was just lying down, sometimes sitting with a pillow under his back. He didn't say anything. And what was there to say if he was in the room all alone? That day, as usual, Kat got into her car after classes ended and stared at the screen. John was lying in bed, but he was talking to someone on the phone. Kat turned up the volume. Did you find them? Where are they now? Mary hasn't been in touch for over a year. What? When did she die? What happened? And Molly? My poor girl. John was silent. It was clear that he was tensely listening to his interlocutor. No. David, I haven't changed my mind. I need to get the wool sorted out quickly while I'm still breathing. Every day it's getting harder for me to stay in this world, buddy. I want my little apartment to belong to Molly. She's had a tough life, and so has Mary. Ah, Mary. Catherine was speechless. Who was this Mary? A mistress? It seemed so. So, John had been cheating on her for many years, and he had a daughter on the side, whom he now planned to leave his little apartment on the outskirts of the city, the one they had been renting out for years. But why this double game? Why didn't he leave her, Kat, and go to that woman, especially since she had a child, his child? She had a suspicion about why things were this way. John hadn't found the strength to leave her. After all, he himself had said that he didn't need any other woman, not even one willing to bear him children. He just felt sorry for her, that's all. That's probably why he stayed late at work, excusing it by saying he was holding extra practice sessions before competitions or something like that. During that time, he was with them, with that woman and her daughter, his daughter. Kat exited the app and tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. She turned on the music and burst into tears. And she had believed that her husband loved her, only her. Even now, when his worn-out body was failing him, he looked at her with such tenderness and love that her heart ached and she felt dizzy. How had she missed it? Could she have been so blind as not to notice that there was another woman in John's life? Kat started the engine. She was determined to talk to her husband and find out everything. Yes, he was close to death, but she needed to know everything, to understand why he hadn't said anything, why he preferred this double life instead of the truth, however bitter. Kitty, sweetheart, you're back? John asked softly when Catherine entered the bedroom with a bottle of cocktail in her hands. John could no longer eat regular food. His strength was sustained by special mixtures that Catherine bought at the pharmacy on the doctor's recommendation. Yes, John, I'm back. I brought you a cocktail. All her resolve vanished instantly. She could no longer stay angry with her husband. She was overwhelmed by boundless love. Yes, it was suffocating because soon there would be no one to give it to. No one. "Well, give me my festive meal, darling," John said, trying to smile. "Please sit down. Stay with me." Of course, Kat sat on the edge of the bed. No, she wouldn't say anything. Let it be, let there be another woman and a daughter, but this was her John, hers. He was here now, in their small house, which they had furnished together with great love. She would stay with him until the end, until death cut the thread of his life. "Kitty, I want to tell you something," John suddenly began, sipping some of the liquid from the bottle. A chill ran down Catherine's spine. Was her husband about to tell her the story of his love for that woman, Mary? No, she wasn't ready to hear it. Not now. But she couldn't say no to her husband. "What do you want to tell me, Johnny?" She ran her hand through his lifeless hair, which had recently been so beautiful and soft. "I want to tell you about a promise I made several years ago." "What promise?" Kat looked intently into her husband's eyes. And John told his wife a story that had happened about 10 years ago. John had a friend, Dean. They had been friends since childhood, always helping each other and constantly coming up with something interesting. The boys were on the same wavelength. That's what everyone who knew them said. Then his friend went abroad for work. There he married a beautiful girl named Mary. They had a baby girl, Molly. Dean came back with his family to visit his sister in their hometown. John had only exchanged a few words with his friend. He had promised to visit them, John and Kat, the next day, but he didn't come because Mary found her husband dead in the morning. "A blood clot broke loose," was the doctor's verdict. At his friend's grave, John swore never to abandon Mary and her little daughter. John kept his promise. He helped them. First, he found an apartment and helped pay the rent. Mary didn't want to accept the help and didn't want Catherine to know about it. Everyone has their quirks. But John didn't stop helping. Sometimes he would go to a nearby town to bring groceries and toys for the girl. Several years passed like this. Then Mary and Molly moved away. From what John understood, she had found a man. She didn't leave an address and changed her phone number. John couldn't understand why she did that. She had always treated him with immense gratitude and respect, and then suddenly she disappeared. Maybe she didn't want to be a bother? Or perhaps it was painful for her to interact with someone who knew her husband so well and reminded her of him every minute she saw him. Now, all that was left was to guess. Then John got sick. At first, he fought with all his might. But the cancer wasn't going to let go, digging its claws into his right kidney and spreading metastases throughout his body, offshoots of its malice and fear of losing its prey. It almost won. John was defeated, lying in bed and fading away every day, every minute. At 45, he looked 70. Only his eyes sometimes still sparkled with childlike mischief, though even they were giving up, growing cloudier and losing their shine and spark of joy and hope. The spark of hope was also fading in Catherine's heart. Why was she losing the person most dear to her? How to live without him? Where to find the meaning of life? Her students? Yes, Catherine loved her job, but they were someone else's children, not hers. All she could do was teach them to read, write, count, and much more. But then they would go home and discuss their day with their parents, watch TV, or go to a pizzeria, and she would return home, where there was no and never would be the sound of children's laughter. No one would ever call her mom or ask for a bedtime story. Life was empty, absolutely empty, like a discarded Pepsi can in the trash. "John, why didn't you tell me about this earlier? We could have helped Mary and her daughter together." She asked me not to say anything, her husband replied wearily, closing his eyes. "And I didn't want to burden you. I just promised Dean, promised at his grave, that I would never abandon his girls. He loved them so much." Tears streamed down the wrinkled cheeks of the man. "Johnny, you're such a good person. People like you shouldn't get sick, They should be enjoying life and bringing joy to others. I lived a happy life, Kathy. I met you, my star, my angel. I'm grateful to the Lord for that. Kate took her husband's hand. He looked at her with eyes full of love, and his gaze froze. He no longer squeezed her hand. John. John, no. Don't die. Kate screamed, beside herself with despair and fear. Her husband wasn't breathing, his pulse, which Catherine had checked so often lately, had stopped. The woman ran her hand over his face to close his eyelids, so she wouldn't see the lifeless gaze of her beloved, the best person on this planet, her true soulmate. No, he hadn't lied to her, he hadn't cheated. He had crushed his dream of having children for her sake. He loved her just as Catherine still loved her husband who had left this world. They never did decide to adopt a child, though they didn't reject the idea, but then it became impossible. After the funeral, Kat wandered aimlessly around the house. Everything reminded her of John. There was his favorite towel with a dolphin on it, and there were his favorite sneakers with bright green laces. Those sneakers would never again run along the park trail early in the morning, never again crunch on the gravel, announcing John's return home. On the nightstand by the bed lay some papers. It was a draft of a will, an unfinished will that would never come into effect. Mary Edwards, Molly Edwards, muttered the woman, her eyes skimming over the sheet of paper filled with John's painfully familiar handwriting. But Mary was dead. John had told her that. Where was her daughter now? Where? For some reason, Catherine remembered the skinny girl she had recently met at the cemetery. What if Mary's daughter was also living in poor conditions and about to be sent to an orphanage? No, she couldn't let that happen. John had promised never to abandon his friend's family, but John was gone now, so only Kat could help the poor girl. David, hi. It's Kat. I was a good friend of the late John. Hi, Katie. How are you? David, please tell me, what do you know about Mary and Molly Edwards? Kat, let me come over, and we can talk, okay? Sure. Is today after 5 convenient for you? Yes, I'm free all day. They said their goodbyes. Catherine barely made it through the last day before summer vacation. After stopping by the store, she headed home. David was due to arrive soon. They sat in the living room, drinking freshly brewed coffee. When Mary died, the girl was taken in by Dean's sister, Gina. They live nearby. She has 2 daughters, and her husband went missing 2 years ago. Kat had heard something similar before, but she wasn't surprised. She hadn't slept well for several nights, and everything in her head was mixed up and confused. David, I'm ready to finish what John started. I mean, the will. Katie, you're an amazing person. Anyone else in your place would have said it's not their business and wouldn't change their life for some orphan. Oh, come on, David. It's just the humane thing to do. I can imagine how she must feel. I recently met a poor girl, about 11, at the cemetery. How I wish no child on earth would ever be without parents. Kat sighed and sipped some coffee from a small white cup. Yes, it's tough for orphans. I know from experience. David placed his cup on the saucer. If you want, we can go to Gina's together and find out everything. We can't process the apartment for the girl right now anyway. It's only been a short time since John's death. Yes, you're right, the woman pondered. Let's go visit them and see if they need any help. They agreed to go to Gina's the next morning. Unfortunately, David didn't have her phone number, so they decided to just go and hope for the best. David, where are we going? To the cemetery? Kat asked, staring out the window. Yeah, then further. You know those old brown houses? That's where Dean's sister lives. Quite a place, really. Catherine shivered. She had already been here with that girl. What was her name? Holly? Yes, it seemed like Holly. Could it be that all unfortunate orphans lived in this terrible place? Suddenly, Kat was struck by a thought. She saw the flower boxes the girl had mentioned. And in that apartment on the third floor lives the girl I met at the cemetery, Kat said, adjusting her seatbelt. How do you know? Who is this girl? Just a poor girl who said she was about to be sent to an orphanage. She lives with her aunt. If I understand correctly, Gina lives in that apartment, and so does Molly. Molly? Yes. She said her name was Molly. And I thought of some holly. My memory is terrible. It's like I'm not 38, but 90. Don't worry, once you recover from the stress, everything will get better. How can I recover from it, David? How? It's so hard without John. I understand, Katie, but you'll have to live without him. You know, you need to find new meaning in life. Get a dog. Start with that. Oh, come on, David. A dog? That's such a responsibility. We're here. He parked the car and turned off the engine. Shall we go? Yes, let's go. Kat unbuckled her seatbelt and opened the door. Gina turned out to be a very pleasant woman with chestnut hair. She was poorly dressed, but her worn-out dress was clean and ironed. Gina, David began, we came to ask about Molly. Who are you? She asked, wary. I'm a friend of John Blair, and this is his wife, Catherine. We wanted to talk to you about the girl. John decided to leave her his apartment, but unfortunately, he passed away before he could finalize it. I want to complete this, Kat interjected. Molly went missing yesterday afternoon. She left and didn't come back home. Maybe she's at a friend's house? Catherine asked, concerned. No, she left a note. Gina handed over a sheet torn from a school notebook. Dear Aunt Gina, I love you very much. Thank you for taking care of me. I know things are very hard for you, but I don't want to go to an orphanage. I'm leaving. Don't look for me. I would rather die than live in that horrible place. In heaven, I will meet Mom and Dad, and we will be fine. Molly. My God. What a nightmare. Kat ran her fingers through her hair and clenched them into a fist. We need to find her. She couldn't have gone far. She couldn't have walked far, but she could have taken a ride, David said thoughtfully. Have you contacted the police? Yes, this morning, Gina wiped her tears. But they say we need to wait, the child will definitely come back. But what if something has already happened to her? God, why does she think I'm going to send her to an orphanage? I would never do that. She's my niece. Gina covered her face with her hands. All right, we need to go, David said resolutely. Where does the girl like to spend time? I don't know, she would just go for walks and then come back, Gina muttered in confusion. I know. Kat jumped up from the chair she was sitting on. She loves to be at the cemetery. The cemetery? Gina and David exclaimed in unison. Yes, that's where I met her. She said she likes the quiet, she can think and dream there. Let's go there immediately. Kat wandered between the graves. All she could hear were the birds singing and lazy flies buzzing. The cemetery was small. You could walk through it in an hour. Molly. Kat shouted. Sweetheart, answer me. No one is going to send you to an orphanage. Molly. But the only response was silence. A squirrel scampered up the trunk of an old tree, nimbly moving its paws. In the far corner of the cemetery, where there were still not many graves, Kat stopped and looked around. Molly, dear, answer me. Kat said softly and sat down on the grass. She hugged her knees and cried, burying her face in them. She hadn't felt such despair since she buried her husband. He wanted so much to help Mary and her daughter. He wanted to. She cannot betray John, she must find Molly no matter what. Suddenly Kat felt someone touch her shoulder. She flinched and looked up. Molly stood before her. Her hair was disheveled, her dress dirty and crumpled. Molly. Kat didn't have the strength to get up. Hi. You came for me? I heard you calling me. I thought I was dreaming. I don't want to go to an orphanage. Molly, sweetheart, no one is going to send you to an orphanage. It's true, your aunt told me that today. You must have misunderstood. No, it's not true. She said, no one can shelter the girl, only me. But I already have 2 girls of my own, and we have hardly any money. Molly, it wasn't about an orphanage. Trust me. Let's take you home. Who's we? Molly stared at Kat. Me and my very good friend. We came together to look for you. Why? And how did you find my aunt? You showed me where you live yourself. It's a long story, my dear. We'll talk about it later. Now let's go. They walked down the path toward David's car. Kat, did you find the girl? They heard from afar. David was walking towards them, smiling broadly. The runaway was brought home. Gina was crying and hugging her niece. How could you think I would send you to an orphanage? Silly girl, you are my niece. You're my brother's daughter. I'm sorry, Aunt Gina. The girl cried in response. I got so scared when I heard the word shelter. Sweetheart, you're so smart, you're doing so well in school, but you don't know such a simple word? David and Kat promised to visit again and headed home. Kat couldn't calm down for a long time. Returning home, the first thing she did was order groceries to be delivered to Gina's address. She decided to always help this family. She had become so attached to the lovely girl Molly. It even felt like she was family. It happens sometimes. You meet someone and feel they're like family, while with your own relatives you always feel like a stranger. Kat couldn't fall asleep for a long time. She thought about her beloved husband who left her so early, about his friend Dean, his wife Mary, and again about Molly. Then her thoughts carried her back to her youth. Catherine did not even tell John about this event. She never told anyone about it at all. She was still afraid to even think about it. She was 16. Her mother had gone to visit friends, and the girl was left home alone. It was getting close to bedtime. Kat was about to go to bed when suddenly there was a knock at the door. It was Mrs. Green's neighbor. Katie, honey, can you help me? What's the matter? She opened the door and asked. We're out of inhalation medicine, and my husband's having a coughing fit. He needs an inhalation right away. Please run to the 24-hour pharmacy. It'll take you 10 minutes, but it'll take me an hour. But it's so late. Kat said with doubt in her voice. Please, there is no one else to ask. Catherine was afraid to go to the pharmacy at such a late hour, but do not leave the neighbors in distress, especially Mr. and Mrs. Green often helped her and her mother. Borrowed money and more. As a child, neighbors often fed Kat, realizing that it was difficult for a single mother to raise her daughter alone. Kat was walking fast. She safely bought the necessary medicine and headed towards the house, as suddenly these 3 guys appeared on her way, guys resembling rockers or bikers, not local. Without further ado, they twisted the girl and dragged her somewhere. There wasn't a soul in the street. They took turns raping her. Such pain and humiliation Catherine had never experienced. Tears rolled down her cheeks. Her whole body ached. The bastards just dumped the girl where they had brought her to fulfill their filthy needs and left, talking and laughing. Catherine struggled to get home. Her pants were covered in blood. She felt like she had been ripped in half. The medicine for the neighbor had miraculously survived. The door was open. Mrs. Green was waiting for Kat. It was a good thing the stairwell was dark. Apparently the light bulb had burned out again, and she hadn't gotten a good look at the girl's condition. What took you so long? She asked, a little irritated. The queue. Kat mumbled and slipped through her door. Catherine spent about an hour in the bathroom, trying to wash away all the dirt, all the pain that these 3 had caused her. The girl did not tell anyone about what had happened. She did not want to bring shame on herself and her poor mother, who had already had a hard time in life. A few weeks later, young Katie realized she was pregnant. She was so confused, not knowing what to do. But it all worked itself out. The girl had a miscarriage. She didn't tell anyone about it either. That was the secret that was eating away at her whole being, not told to anyone, sealed in her heart like a lump of blood. Because of those monsters, Kat couldn't get pregnant again. After that terrible incident, she erased all men from her life. Her friends were puzzled as to why she rejected everyone and couldn't stand male company. How could they know that she had gone through such a traumatic event? Even years later, it still sent chills down her spine and made her heart ache. Then John appeared. Kat was amazed at how he could be both a dedicated athlete and such a gentle, romantic, and caring person who couldn't stand injustice and always tried to help those in need. Initially, they just talked in the staff room. Gradually, the young coach began to win over the heart of the suffering teacher, who had recently lost her only relative, her mother. John didn't pressure her, though he was ready to propose to Catherine the moment he first saw her. Kat finally understood that a normal man, could bring joy, care, and love, genuine love, every day, even when they argued. Catherine blossomed beside this strong man with such a vulnerable soul. The two of them were always happy together. They were even surprised when other couples they knew talked about needing a break from each other and going on solo trips. John and Kat would rather take a break from everyone else together. They couldn't imagine going anywhere without each other. Their friends jokingly called them inseparables. Once, on their anniversary, they were even given a painting nearly the size of a wall, depicting those adorable birds cuddling on a green branch. The painting held a place of honor in their bedroom. It still hung in their small bedroom to this day, now only her bedroom, Catherine's. Kat couldn't stay in bed any longer and went to the kitchen. She brewed herself some green tea with jasmine. It always relaxed her, although such tea is considered a stimulating drink. Kat sat at the table, wrapping her hands around a large cup decorated with yellow flowers. Loneliness hovered around her, spreading throughout the house, filling every corner. Sometimes it became simply unbearable. Maybe David was right. I should get a dog or some other pet, Kat thought. She wanted someone to be around, someone to whom she could give her love and care. Catherine firmly decided to get herself a kitten. With this thought, she returned to the bedroom, climbed into bed, and fell asleep instantly. Catherine began looking for a pet through advertisements. But something always went wrong. It was either too far away, too expensive, only female cats were left, or she just didn't like the breed. She decided not to rush and put off getting a kitten. During her vacation, the loneliness was especially unbearable. She wanted to be with someone, not a colleague, not a friend, but with someone, with a child. Yes, exactly. She wanted to interact with children. One morning, Catherine dialed Gina's number. Katie, hi. Gina greeted cheerfully. Hi, Gina. I was wondering if I could come visit you. Is that okay? Of course, dear. We're always happy to see you. Come over. The girls will be thrilled. They really liked you. They had a wonderful day. Kat brought a bunch of games for the kids and played with them with pleasure. When it was time to leave, the girls were upset and didn't want to let their new friend go. Molly walked Kat to the car. Will you come see us again? Molly asked hopefully, looking at Catherine. Of course, I will. I don't want to say goodbye to you either. Me neither, never ever. Molly hugged Kat and pressed her thin little body against her. Molly, would you like to be my daughter? Catherine suddenly asked. What? But that's impossible, Molly said wistfully. Why? It just takes time. I'll come by tomorrow, okay? We'll talk to your aunt about everything. And you'll take me with you? Molly smiled broadly. But what about my aunt? My darling, we live so close. We'll visit each other often. Really? Of course, my girl. Molly hugged Kat again. She missed her mom so much, and this kind woman reminded her so much of her, just as warm and gentle, and also fun when you start playing games like crocodile with her. Catherine's heart was ready to leap out of her chest when she started thinking about the fact that soon she and Molly, the lovely girl who enjoyed walks in the local cemetery, would be living together. Could it be that she would finally have a daughter? She would do everything to make the girl happy. If John hadn't fallen ill, they would be handling the adoption together right now. The couple had never dared to take a child from the orphanage. Gina was initially very surprised that Kat wanted to adopt her niece. But then she agreed. She understood that Molly would be much happier if she had a real mother who loved her and was ready to take care of her. "Gina, can I take Molly at least for the summer holidays? I understand it's a long process, and she might have to return to you until all the documents are signed, but for now." "Of course, I don't mind." She lights up whenever she finds out you're coming to visit. "And so do I," Kat admitted honestly. "I've become so attached to her. And that time when Molly ran away from home, and I wandered through the cemetery, calling and crying, that was when I realized I couldn't bear it if anything happened to her. She's like my own child. This is the first time I've felt this way. You're so good. It's such a shame that John passed away. Mary told me that he always helped them, that he was." Gina's eyes filled with tears, very kind and caring. "He would have been a wonderful father." "Yes, I know, but I couldn't give him children. It's all because of those thugs in leather jackets." "What thugs?" Gina looked intently at her companion and lowered her voice. And Catherine told her horrifying story in every detail. She was doing it for the first time. For 22 years, the woman had carried this secret, this wild pain inside her. And now the abscess had burst. Kat was surprised that she told this to Gina, a woman she had seen only a few times, but who had already become a good friend. Several months passed before Catherine was officially recognized as Molly's mother. Now they would be together. It's so wonderful. One day in early December, Molly peeked into Kat's room. "Mama," the girl had quickly started calling her that, "let's get a kitten. It will purr and cuddle with us. It's so sweet. You know, baby, I thought about a kitten even before I proposed this deal to you," she smiled conspiratorially. "What deal?" Molly was surprised and plopped onto the bed. "Well, becoming my daughter and all that." "Oh," the girl drawled and hugged her adoptive mother. "Let's get a kitten. You can choose it yourself because I haven't had much luck with that." On the anniversary of John's death, Kat and Molly decided to first pick up Gina. She had left her daughters with a neighbor, and then they all went together to visit his grave. They stood and looked at the photo of a young man. He was smiling, his eyes radiating happiness and joy. Yes, John was like that. Always. But the illness had turned him into a feeble old man, thin and haggard. However, in Catherine's memory, he would always remain like this, full of energy and love for her. "I remember Uncle John," Molly said, standing next to Kat. "He played with me and told me that when I grew up, I would be the happiest and most beautiful girl in the world." "I will do everything to make you the happiest," Catherine said, wiping away tears from her cheeks. "And he was definitely right about the second part. You will be the most beautiful." Suddenly Gina's phone rang, and she stepped aside to talk. She spoke for about 5 minutes. "What happened?" Catherine asked, looking at Gina, who seemed very agitated. It seems they found my husband." "Is he alive?" Kat's eyes widened. "Did they find Uncle? Where is he?" Molly jumped in place. "It's not here, not in our city. We will need to go there and they told me he doesn't remember anything. Go whenever you need to. Don't worry, we'll take the girls while you're away." "Thank you, dear," Gina hugged her friend. "God, I hope it's him." They walked to the car. Each of them was lost in her own thoughts, but one common thought crossed their minds: how wonderful it is to have each other, for together they can overcome anything.